Alright, welcome back to Room 237, back with another review. Now, I'm continuing my sort of marathon or run-through of A24 films. If you follow my channel, you know for quite a while I'm a huge fan of A24. Love their horror films. They are my favorite film company. I used to say favorite film company for modern horror films. They still are. And I've started to venture outside of horror and just check out what some of those films are like, and some of those I think are great as well. So I went through the entire A24 catalog, pulled all the horror films, and also just whatever non-horror ones kind of stood out to me, seemed interesting. Made a wish list, now I'm tackling it. As far as non-horror goes, I reviewed Into the Forest, which is kind of horror, kind of thriller. A Ghost Story, which I thought was great. Uncut Gems, which was a masterpiece. And this is another one that's not a horror film. Which is kind of strange because given the title, the cover, whether it's this one or the original poster, and even the short synopsis that were given, whether it be the back of the DVD or just the short one on the internet, it sounds like, if not horror, definitely like a murder mystery thriller. So that's what I expected going into it, and it is definitely not that at all. But it definitely is an A24 film, and it's 2017's The Vanishing of Sidney Hall. Yeah, even just by, this definitely makes it look like a thriller. And when I read the back, I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe it's kind of like The Vanishing from 1988, which I have reviewed. That's a phenomenal film as well. But no, it's kind of just a character study about a young writer who just goes missing. And this a detective looks at. I'll get into it. So yeah, even with how little I knew about it, I went and checked it out on the sole idea of it being A24. It's the only reason why I picked it up. I have looked online what people have thought of it. Now on YouTube, it tends to do fairly well. People seem to like it. Rotten Tomatoes, on the other hand, I think this has got to be the worst reviewed film I've seen by A24. Rotten Tomatoes, it holds an 11%, which I do not understand why. Called like worthless women-hating garbage, which I did not get at all. I don't get where people find this to be a woman-hating. Save for maybe the opening poem, and the only female character that's portrayed somewhat negatively would be Sidney Hall's mother, played by, who was it? Michelle Monaghan. It's not that bad. And yes, other reviews say it's kind of like an angsty pity party for the sort of stereotypical, brooding, pretentious writer, which that I can see. And yeah, I can see if people think the narrative is a bit pretentious, or certainly the ending, how it tells the story. But I found it interesting, and I will say for a runtime of 117 minutes, it does feel long. It feels longer than 2 hours. But I did find the story interesting. The way the narrative is broken up, which is incredibly non-linear, the three timelines are all just interspersed with each other. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There are some things, like towards the end, we'll get a flashback that kind of explains the course of the film, or things that, so twists and certain mysteries can be revealed later on, whereas if it was told chronologically, we wouldn't really have that. And there are a couple mysteries throughout the film. Some of them I did not see coming at all. Others, kinda. But it's also a very depressing movie. I can see if some people find it inspirational or uplifting, but to me, this was a depressing movie. Now, it was directed by Sean Christensen, who won the Oscar for the short film Curfew, which would eventually go on to become the film Before I Disappear. And I believe it was also written by him and Jason Dolan. Stars Logan Lerman, whom I've seen before. He's our lead as Sidney Hall. He does great. All the performances are, it's one of the highlights of the film, is the acting. However, with him and Elle Fanning, or Ellie Fanning, as great as they are, I couldn't help but wonder what Barry Cogan would have done as City Hall, or maybe Anya Taylor Johnson as Melody. As good as they were, that's just what I was thinking. Like, I wonder what they would have been like. Maybe not change Elle Fanning, but I was wondering what Barry Cogan would have been like in this role. Maybe it's because there was a trailer for Killing of a Sacred Deer on this DVD, and that's one of my top 5 favorite A24 films. But they still do a great job. The supporting cast is also great. I mean, you have Kyle Chandler, who plays the detective. I think he's credited as the Searcher, or the Searcher slash something else. As I've said, Michelle Monaghan, Nathan Lane. Haven't seen him in forever. Playing, I don't want to say a serious role, but like a not over the top, flamboyant, almost cartoon character. Who else do we have? We have an appearance by Tim Blake Nelson, who I think is awesome. Blake Jenner and what Yahya Abdul Mateen II as Sydney's teacher. So the supporting cast does a great job as well. Now, oh, sorry, I was just reading up on something. I saw something about casting, and I was just curious. Did he really? I wonder if he did talk to Barry Cogan, but no. Daniel Katz served as the cinematographer, and the cinematography is also one of the highlights. I mean, it's A24. It's going to be shot beautifully. I guess they were going to use a traditional photographic film, but decided to go digital. The score who did do the score? The score does have a very acoustic kind of indie film, kind of like what people might think an indie film is like. Uh, uh, Darren Morza, if I pronounce that correctly, and premiered at Sundance in 2017. Yeah, I don't really want to say a Mumford & Sons, but music kind of like that. And we really jump between these time periods of when Sidney Hall is 18, 24, and 30. You know, when he's in high school, he kind of gets in trouble for his sort of transgressive. What is the word I'm looking for? I guess transgressive is the word I'm looking for, but really kind of raw, confrontational type writing. He almost gets expelled for this one essay that he writes, but he's also the favorite of this other English teacher. But it shows him deciding to write a book, because of the idea that he has to listen to what his teacher says because she wrote a book, so people kind of want to go with her idea to expel him. He's like, well, what if I wrote a book? And then at 24, it's sort of post-success. He's had 2 books out, and just him dealing with the overwhelming success that he has. Also, some of the backlash. I mean, there's kind of a J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye type story to this. And then 30, which is after he's gone missing for almost 7 years and someone is going around burning his books, and the detective Kyle Chandler is trying to find both Sidney Hall, and he thinks maybe this book burner has something to do with it. That's basically the story. That's really all I can say before getting into spoilers. Uh, don't go into this movie thinking it's going to be like a murder mystery, because it's not. The the title isn't really misleading, because the title does play into the story fairly well, but definitely the cover, even the original poster of just a train car, kind of gives it you know kind of an indie sort of murder mystery thriller kind of look to it. But it is very well shot, very well acted. I can see why some people might call it a bit pretentious or a bit too, but it's certainly a character study. There's not really a story, but there is a character study. Uh, I guess they even address how Sidney Hall, he calls himself self-indulgent, pretentious, and it's just like his second book is just pretentious babblings almost. So I can see why some people might think it's this kind of self-indulgent look at an artist. The woe is me, my life is so hard and complex to live. But by the end of the movie, I was thinking, this guy didn't have the easiest life, or not in the sense of like abuse or anything like that, but just the world of stress and just things that have been put on him. The way it's told, it can be confusing at first, with the three stories just kind of overlapping each other. It can get kind of hard to follow at first. And again, I don't know if the movie would have worked as well if it was told chronologically, because there are some twists, some mystery revelations that do play out better at X point in the film. But I still thought it was, at the very, very least, worth checking out. I mean, if you like A24 just for being A24 and you just like the films that they put out, uh, on that basis alone, I think you'll like it. But don't go into it thinking it's like a thriller or like a murder mystery, because that's what I did. I still ended up liking the film, but it's almost like a coming of age type story, or at least one of those time frames feels very much coming of age. But yeah, it's definitely an art house indie film character study. So with that, I'm gonna get to spoilers. Uh, so his first book, Suburban Tragedy, it catches on, becomes this big thing. Well, first, when he's 18, a few things happen. He gets a girlfriend named Melody, who really likes his writing. She's like a secret admirer. He falls in love with her. This high school bully needs his help in digging up something that they buried when they were young kids. And I kind of related to this kid, uh, at least when he was in high school. I mean, I read a lot in high school. I tried writing. I used to write poetry. I didn't really write stories, but I had a lot of ideas for stories. And then like scenes in his bedroom. I mean, there's posters of Arthur Rimbaud. I think there's one of Nietzsche, but like all these other writers that I read in high school. I mean, I still have a bunch of books by Nietzsche. I have the complete works of Arthur Rimbaud. I still read that stuff. Uh, so kind of similar tastes in books. I've always loved English and writing and reading. So I kind of related to him on that level. Also, with just how he talks to the jock at first, when they're both kind of enemies, because that's how I was in high school, and just how cynical he is towards people. But but we don't find out what was buried that the bully needs, but we see he's being abused, and then one day he commits suicide. Then when he's 24, we see you know, wild success. Uh, Melody is leaving him. He's having this affair, kinda. It doesn't really seem if it's an affair or just the period in between which he's leaving that gives him another chance. And he's up for the Pulitzer Prize. And Nathan Lane is his publisher. But this one obsessed fan kills himself, and it's believed that both Sidney Hall and Suburban Tragedy was his major influence. So it becomes a banned book and pulled for the Pulitzer Prize. And then when he's 30, we see that a long-haired, bearded guy is going around burning his books. Kyle Chandler is trying to find Sidney Hall and the guy burning the books. And the reveal is that the book burner is Sidney Hall. He either faked his own death or just vanished and became another person with the aid of Tim Blake Nelson, whom is someone he was acquainted with when he was 18 on the first date with a Melody. And we find out that Kyle Chandler is not a detective, but he's the writer that Sidney was up against for the Pulitzer Prize. And he wants to write a book on Sidney Hall. I guess the whole idea is he's this great writer, but the life he's lived is the perfect story and someone needs to write it. And at first he says no, but his health is declining, and pretty much on his deathbed, he gives Kyle Chandler, the stack of papers he had been writing while being banished for 7 years. And then it's revealed at that point that Suburban Tragedy was based on the suicide of his jock friend, and Melody died. We're supposed to believe that she just up and left him, but she ended up dying in his arms from an asthma attack when they were stuck in an elevator. And the night she died was when he vanished. And, I didn't see all the twists and turns coming. Maybe it's just because Kyle Chandler plays like an inspector so well that I just bought him as that role. So when he revealed himself as the other writer, I didn't see that coming. A Melody's death, I didn't think that was coming. And there's some other stuff, because throughout the whole movie, we see that he's suffering hallucinations and seizures. I think we're supposed to believe it's just from the pressures and the anxiety of all this success and backlash. But towards the end, we see that when he first went to go leave to publish his book when he was 18, his abusive mother was slapping him around, threw him, he hit his head off a table or something, and that left scar tissue on the left side of his brain, which we do hear at one point the left side is scar tissue, but we never find out how or why up until these end revelations. Also, we find out that the jock friend committed suicide because it was something he felt he failed him. Because I thought what was in the lunchbox that they buried was a pistol. But when he's revealing all this on his deathbed, because he had just been drinking nonstop and going without his hallucination meds, that he's dying. So when he reveals to Kyle Chandler the origin of Suburban Tragedy, I thought the thing they buried and dug up was a gun that he was going to use on his dad or whatever. Ended up using it on himself. No, we find out is a VHS tape. A VHS tape of his abusive father, who was a judge, having sex with a very young girl. And he had just stowed it away. He buried it, so one day he could use it for authorities to get him out of his life. So he had Sidney hold on to it, but while him, Melody, uh, the friend, and his sister were all at the fair, Sidney's mother goes in his room to do laundry, found the VHS tape, watched it, thought it was his, thought he was into child porn, read his journals and saw all this bad stuff about her, and threw it in the fire. And so when he told his friend, hey, my mom destroyed the tape, that's when he killed himself. So he's kind of carried this burden throughout the remainder of his life. And, you know, that was the birth of Suburban Tragedy, which in turn caused another kid to, well, 22-year-old to commit suicide. And then just with his wife, his pregnant wife dying, that was when he just vanished. But I guess it was also because he was doing something that him and Melody talked about when he was 18, when they were 18, which was about just traveling the world and then eventually finding this house from a magazine. And then when they're 30, that's where they'll live. And so it's like he did buy the house, but he just kind of lived as a nomad after she died, I guess, to kind of fulfill that traveling dream that they talked about when they were young. And the ending does kind of have a bittersweet ending where, you know, he finally dies, but he envisions he's dying with her. I mean, there's a lot going on in this film. There's a lot more I could get into, but I don't really want to talk about it that much already, over 20 minutes. But I mean, it might have pacing issues, and at the very beginning, the whole three timelines kind of playing around each other can get confusing, but the score is well done. You know, even though it might not be my kind of music to listen to, it worked for the film. All the performances are great. I mean, Logan Lerman is great in all three periods of his life. Really liked Elle Fanning. Kyle Chandler is Kyle Chandler. I mean, uh, even if he plays a role that's very similar to other things I've seen him in, he always does it well. Even the bit roles like Nathan Lane, Tim Blake Nelson, it was great to see them. And I will say that what does help the non-linear narrative is I did like the uh, twists and the reveals later on in the film. I do think it played out better that way. Whereas if it just told it straight and chronological, it might have it would have seemed obviously more straightforward, but maybe less interesting. Because also we get a lot of stuff out of context and we're just like, well, what's all that about? And then when it's actually explained later, it does make sense. So I do think the nonlinear narrative, it took some getting used to at first, but in the end, it did work to its advantage. And really, probably the biggest thing, and it's my own fault, is I really can't hold this to the film itself, but you know, I did go into it expecting a movie like The Vanishing for 1988, like a murder mystery thriller, borderline horror film. So that kind of is my own fault. That's not a detriment to the film itself, but I still enjoyed it. I do not get where people call it like women hating garbage. I didn't see any of that in this. It is a fairly depressing film. It's not uplifting. Maybe towards the end it is, but even then, it's kind of a bittersweet thing. I can see where people might think it's pretentious or kind of putting the brooding, struggling, well, not struggling as far as success, but you know, sort of that stereotype of like the pretentious writer, sort of like the snobby writer, and just doing like a pity party, which were some words used in some negative reviews. I see where people might get that. I didn't see it as bad as they did, but definitely the performances helped it. And the cinematography, as always with A24, it looks great. Not really sure what else to say about it. I'm pretty sure the rest of the films on my A24 list are not going to be this far off from horror. Uh, they're all somewhat. The ones that are non horror are still somewhat thrillers in their own way. But just as a heads up. But yeah, this might be the farthest leap from horror that I do. Even some of the comedies that I'll be doing, like Slice and Life After Beth, are still horror. They're still comedy horror films or horror comedies. So, but yeah, I do not think this deserves the 11% on Rotten Tomatoes. Uh, I did enjoy it. I thought it was well made. It's definitely a different kind of film than I'm used to, but it was a good experience, good viewing experience. It, even though I like slow paced movies, this felt longer than 2 hours, so maybe the pacing was an issue. But yeah, I got a number of A24 films to do and ones that are still coming. And then I'll do all the countdowns, so stay tuned for those, and thank you for watching.